Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our series on intro syntax. Today, we're going to be doing raising and control. I'm kind of skipping around a little bit in terms of where we are in the Carney text. If you are following along in the book or using the book to study along with us, this is actually chapter 15, which is one of the last chapters of the book. And then I'm going to jump back and talk a little bit more about some of the expansions on movement and the expanded VP in some subsequent videos. So I'm kind of skipping ahead in where we are in the book. But I don't think it's going to interfere too much with where we are. We've really already sort of, in terms of our understanding of movement, I think we're already in a pretty good place there. And then expanding the VP is something we need to do. It's something we will do. Excuse me. But it's something that I don't think we need to do to understand raising and control today. So, and we'll probably come back to raising and control as well once we sort of package all those other things together. So the basic pattern that we're going to try to account for, we're going to start by looking at what are known as raising constructions. We'll then, raising constructions, and then we'll expand our view into control constructions. So the basic pattern that we're going to try to look at are sentences like Selicum seems to be happy. And Selicum, excuse me, not Selicum. It seems Selicum is happy. And we're going to play around with these constructions in a couple different ways today. So we'll play around with these constructions for a little while. We'll build up these derivations. I'm going to do something a little bit interesting with happy. I don't think this is done in the Carney text, but it's not something that is going to be that should be a big surprise by any means. Before I forget, at the start of last video, I identified the fish on my mask as starfish. That was clearly just a speech error. They're obviously swordfish. I mean, I am going a little mad in social isolation, but not that mad. I still know my basic animals. Anyway, so let's talk about these two constructions. So one of the things we're clearly interested in here is the behavior and appearance of this it relative to these two things. And so why Selicum can appear here, or why it appears as the matrix subject. And we could also notice that we can't say, for instance, it seems Selicum to be happy, or Selicum seems I'm trying to Selicum seems is happy. Yeah, that's also bad. So there's something kind of special going on with the behavior of tense down low in this lower clause, and that's going to be sort of the driving factor that's going to help us determine what's happening in these trees. So I want to start by doing the derivation of it seems Selicum is happy, and then we'll do the derivation of Selicum seems to be happy. They're going to be very similar, but then critically, there's going to be a critical difference there. So as I mentioned before, there's something kind of critical going on that's a little bit different in how we're going to treat this adjective down low So we have this adjective, happy. And again, this is not really in the Carney text. It might be. But I am going to put Celicum, the DP Celicum, in the specifier position of happy to begin the derivation. And the reason I'm doing this is for theta purposes. You'll sometimes see this referred to as a small clause. Not as much in this context. With the fully expanded tense above it, with the is or the to be, but these types of expressions of a noun phrase with an adjective do have certain properties that sometimes are allowed to appear in this type of pattern. But this is really how we're going to treat copular constructions. So Celicum is tall. This is a really nice way of treating these types of copular constructions, where this that adjective tall is the lower predicate, and it is assigning its theta role to its specifier, and then that specifier is going to raise just the same way that the specifier of a verb would. And we'll notice that there's not really a verb in those constructions. It doesn't much matter. So, again, we're in our sort of X bar schema. There's no mandate that a particular phrase be within the construction. What we care about are that that case, that theta, and these types of constraints are satisfied. So we have an adjective phrase rather than a verb phrase in this construction. Happy. On top of that, we're going to build our tense. What's special about this one, because we're doing Celicum seems to be happy. So we are going to put our, I forgot. We are going to have a verb here. It's going to be our is verb. But we're going to fill in our verb here. So you could also put the verb Celicum in the specifier of the verb position, in the VP. I don't think that makes as much sense in terms of what it's getting theta-wise. We will cyclically raise it through that specifier position, though, which is something I will revisit in a future video. So we have our verb be here. It has a specifier position. On top of that, we're going to get a T-bar containing a special tense, which is a minus finite tense. It has, so it's this tense marker 2. And this tense is a special tense marker because it's, this tense marker here doesn't is known as non-finite infinitive, but what's going to be critical about this is this tense marker doesn't have case. It doesn't have nominative case associated with it. It still has its specifier position. We're also going to leave off a CP. We'll notice that you can't say things like it seems, well, you can say it seems that Celicum is happy, but you can't say Celicum seems that to be happy. So in these constructions, when you have these non-finite constructions, they also seem to disallow the presence of that higher C complex. So then we're going to get our verb phrase again. And I, again, failed to plan appropriate space. So we have our verb here, seems. I may end up having to, I really don't want to have to do that. I think I can get away with this. Yeah, I can. It's going to be a little tight up top, but we can do this. There is a CP above this. We have a T here that is minus past. It itself is going to have nominative case. It's also going to have an EPP feature. Okay. So, what do we have so far? Well, we have Celicum receiving a theta roll from happy. Again, you could also argue it's up here and receiving maybe some sort of theta roll from is happy. Either one is sort of a reasonable assumption. I'm putting it down here inside this adjective phrase. Celicum will then, this DP Celicum is not in a case position. That's critical though, so it needs to raise. It can raise to, so, and again, we haven't discussed this in critical detail. It may raise into the specifier of this V. And the reason it would do this is much the same reason that that our WH words or WH phrases move, is that they want to move to the closest available positions of the like type. So this is a movement, and so it needs to move into available A positions. Well, here it's moving for case reasons. It's going to move into this little V, or into this specifier of V position, and it's going to get nothing basically done there. There's no case, and there's no EPP to check. So it moves up here. And then it's going to do it again, moving into the embedded TP. Here, it at least accomplishes something, but it doesn't get case. So it stops in this embedded specifier position, and it checks the EPP of this embedded TP, but there's no case here. So this DP still has to keep moving because it still requires its case. It'll raise again. It'll stop off in this embedded V specifier of V position, and then raise all the way up into the matrix TP position, where it'll get its nominative case and check the EPP feature of the highest TP. And that gives us our pronunciation. Celicum seems to be happy. There also is going to be, however you want to do this, perhaps T lowering or selection on seems, but there's some sort of relationship there. So that's our sentence. So the critical thing is that Celicum needs to begin in a theta position and needs to raise via some sort of cyclic movement up into the highest T position where it will receive case. In doing so, it will stop at the intermediate specifier of T position and check the EPP of that intermediate TP. So everything in this sentence is happy. And this is all the main reason is that there's a non-finite T down low, which does not offer case. So let's look at the sentence when there is a finite T down low. And I'm going to start the sentence from up top, at least the structure, so I know I have a little bit more space to work with. And we've seen the structure building. So hopefully this is not as challenging. So again, there's going to be a CP on top of this sentence that I'm just going to leave off for space purposes. I'm just going to draw up the structure real quick. And as we saw when I mentioned last time, we could potentially have this one could be an embedded CP. So I'm going to go ahead and do this because pronounced when we have that finite T intermediately, or as that embedded clause, we can in fact get a that. So that's evidence that we can have this as a finite. There's some finiteness there. Or the finiteness does more with our structure than just provide. So here I did manage to fit it all on this is just the skeletal structure. So we have happy. Let's see if I can write this up. Happy Selicum. Oh no, I screwed up. All right, I'm gonna cheat a little bit. This needs to be a VP. There we go. I have a V here. And this one is finite. It's going to start as B and it's going to raise. This is minus past. That's 0. Here we are going to have a V, which is seams. And here we are going to have T, which is minus past. Okay. So once again, we have Selicum in this position. Selicum is going to get theta from the theta roll from happy. Again, you could argue that it gets a theta roll from the overall V complex up here. Either answer is perfectly reasonable. I'm just treating it as part of this internal adjective phrase. This kind of conforms more with my view of predicate world than I think Carney's view of predicate worlds, but it really, really does not matter ultimately. There's probably some really fine-grained nuances that for our purposes don't matter. But it is nice because it illustrates a little bit of that notion of cyclic movement to a certain degree. So again, we're going to need to trigger, we're going to have this, but this is not a case position. So it's a theta position, but not a case position. So Celicum is going to need to raise for case. However, here, let's do our head movement first, actually. So we have a verb, which is be. It's going to raise in this case because it's a small enough verb and become is. This t is actually now is finite. So this is a tensed position, which means it has nominative case to give. It still also has its EPP to satisfy. So Celicum is going to just raise on up, stop in here. I'm just going to elide that. And then raise on up into here. And here, in this specifier of t position, Celicum can get both case and satisfy the EPP of this t position. And Celicum then has no reason to keep moving. So that DP is going to stop because the DP is greedy and lazy. The DP is not going to keep moving for no reason. So then we go up to the higher part of this clause, and we have a tense up here. So there's this relationship between t and seems, but this tense up here still has an EPP feature that it needs to satisfy. And here we see a real what is known as that expletive emerging again. So that it is going to fly in and rescue this derivation. And we just get this dummy pronoun, it, that is sort of meaningless, that just emerges because no other subject is available. And so we call these constructions raising constructions. And the reason they're raising constructions is because if we go back to that previous sentence, Celicum seems to be happy. Celicum is raising out of that lower clause into the higher clause, even though it has no theta association with seems. Seems only has a single theta role, which is a propositional theta role, and that proposition is Celicum be happy. So when Celicum raises out of that that lower clause, the DP is but so it does, and it does so when the embedded clause does not have a finite tense. When there is finite tense down low, then the DP will remain low and we'll get an expletive. Now, raising constructions stand in contrast with a very similar in appearance construction, which are known as control constructions. And the way we can distinguish them are in two critical ways. One, control constructions do not ever get these expletive its. And two, control constructions, the reason they don't get them is because they have theta properties. And so we can look for the theta properties of these of the verbs involved. So we'll look at the sentence, Hadass is reluctant to leave. But we're still going to need to add something to our understanding of syntax to be able to analyze these sentences. So we can notice several things about these, about the sentence, is that, again, we have a non-finite embedded clause here. I can't say, for instance, Hadass is reluctant Hadass to leave. I can't say Hadass is I can't say it is reluctant. Hadass is leaving, unless it is like some sort of sentient thing that refers to something in the real world that has that has a theta association with reluctant. So, and what's critical here is that Hadass is reluctant about Hadass leaving. And that's different than what we saw with the raising constructions, where those raising constructions, Selicum wasn't seeming in any way. There was still just this sort of propositional content. So, but Hadass is reluctant and Hadass is leaving. So we're going to introduce this property known as, or this grammatical notion known as big pro. And big pro is a interesting grammatical category. Big pro is similar to our anaphor, is sort of in between an anaphor and a pronoun, but always covert. And we can find big pro in other contexts as well. There's a very famous example from Chomsky. We're not going to analyze this example, but it's an example of ambiguity that critically relies on a version of big pro in one of its readings, which is known as pro-arb. So the sentence is, visiting relatives can be tedious. Now there's two readings of this sentence. Now, I know in our world right now of social isolation, the notion of either of these is, probably not tedium. You'd be like a visitor of any type or visiting someone in any way. Hooray! But, the notion of the sentence is that, so in one reading, visiting is functioning as an adjective, and the notion is that visiting, the relatives who are visiting, they can be tedious people. The other reading requires a pro subject, a null subject, which is an arbitrary person, an arbitrary, like any individual. Pro-arb, like just doing this, visiting relatives can be tedious. So pro has this interesting property where pro can either obligatorily agree with something earlier in the sentence or sort of agree with, if it is in another context, just sort of agree arbitrarily out there in the world. There's a lot of theory spent on pro. We're not going to worry so much about it, but we're interested in the sort of syntactic distribution of it and so forth. So our curiosity with pro is how do we account for these examples relative to our raising examples? Well, thankfully, they're quite simple once we introduce this notion of pro. They're just going to follow from our X-bar schema and the rules that we've already generated. So again, I'm just going to build a structure here. Again, there should be a CP on top of this, but for space reasons, feels like I left something out, but Okay. So we have our sentence here, and you'll notice this tree is very, very simple. Just a TP with a VP, embedding another TP with a VP. So we have in our lower TP down here a leave, which is assigning a theta role to this pro. Pro will then raise into the subject position of this lower TP to satisfy the EPP requirements. What's critical about pro is that it being sort of this null element is it doesn't require case, because case is something that is required for you to be sort of visible at pronunciation, but pro is not pronounced. Pro is something that we require for maybe interpretation, but not for pronunciation. So it's perfectly happy to exist in a non-case position. It can help us check EPP features though. So it shows up there, and then up here we get Hadass in our getting its theta position, theta role from reluctant, and much the same. Oh, I left off the. Just gonna fill this in with is. Much the same. I really should have had a stacked VP here, but is going to the Hadass is then going to just sort of scooch up into here, and there so it gets its theta roll from reluctant, and then it's going to check the EPP feature and check the get nominative case from that higher position. And then the fact that it is in sort of this binding C commands, and then they're going to be co-indexed with each other, so we'll get a binding relation between Hadass and Pro. So that's the sort of core explanation of raising and control. It has to do really with the amount of theta rolls involved. If both verbs in the sentence are assigning theta rolls, then we can in fact get multiple theta rolls. If both verbs are assigning theta rolls, then we have a control construction. If one verb or one predicate, to put it more precisely, is not, then we likely have a control construction when we're dealing with these sort of null elements. I'm totally misspoke, not a control construction. If one predicate is not assigning a theta roll, then we have a raising construction. Whew! Need more coffee. Apologize for that. And of course, these can stack up. You can have raising constructions with control constructions. I am going to leave you with a little bit of a challenge, which I will tree to start next video. But I want Hadass seems to be likely to leave, and it seems Hadass is likely to leave. So see if you can figure out the structures for these two sentences. And I will leave it there. As always, I'm going to close off with a brief... As I knock all of my whiteboards and stuff down, I will close off with the brief quotes. Here again, I'm going back to Fred Rogers. This is a quote about really taking care of yourself. The toughest thing is to love someone who has done something mean to you, especially when that someone has been yourself. Look inside yourself and find that loving part of you. Take good care of that part, because that part helps you love your neighbor. All right. I wish you all good health, and I will see you all next time.